Afternoon. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It's Thursday, January 30th, 2025, just a couple of minutes after 1 o'clock. And we have with us this afternoon the Chief Performance Officer, Justin Kenny, and Katie Bockwell is the State Director of Performance Improvement. And Justin may have been here in the past, and I don't know whether, Katie, you have been, but we have 5 new members this year anyway. So we will go around and introduce ourselves. And we have one on Zoom also. And then we'll ask you guys to introduce yourselves, and then we can start the conversation from there.
Good afternoon. I'm Dave Iacoboni from Morrisville, and I represent the Lamoille, Washington district.
Good afternoon and welcome. John Kosenska from the town of Burke, and I represent the Essex Caledonia district.
I'm Mike Nigro. I represent Bennington and Pelham.
Tom Stevens from Waterbury, representing the Washington Chittenden district.
Good afternoon, Jim Harrison from the town of Chittenden, also represent Mendon, Killington, and Pittsfield.
And I'm Robin Scheid from Middlebury.
Tiffany from Burlington.
Travis Squirrel, Underhill, and Jericho.
Wayne Rush, Highgate, Franklin, Berkshire, and Richford.
Hi, I'm Mike Berwicki from the Wyndham Ford District of Putney and Dummerston.
And Lynn?
And Lynn Dickinson, I represent St. Albans Town.
Okay, great. Thank you. So that's us, and tell us about you two, please.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, it's probably been a couple of years since we've testified in appropriations, actually, so it has been some time. But I am Justin Kenny. I'm the Chief Performance Officer for the state in the Agency of Administration. And I took over in this role roughly around 2021, 2022. And I took over for the prior Chief Performance Officer, Susan Zeller, who had been in the role since about 2014.
Great.
You wanna go?
And I'm Katie Buckwalt. I am the State Director of Performance Improvement. I've been in this role for almost 3 years now. And prior to joining the Agency of Administration, I was in the Agency of Transportation and the Agency of Natural Resources.
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, and welcome. So you have something to show us, and it's on the screen, so that's great.
I've got a couple things to show you, actually. So thanks for the opportunity for us to come in and talk about our program, as well as the programmatic performance measure budget report, which is going to be the bulk of what I'll talk about. Because it has been a while and do have some new members, I thought it would be good to provide very briefly an overview of what the chief performance is and what we do. And then we'll dive into this particular report. So high level, who we are. So we are a small team of 2 individuals. So it's just Katie and I in the Chief Performance Office, and we're situated in the central office of the Agency of Administration. We primarily work with the executive branch, but technically we're available for consult to all 3 branches of state government. And our mission is to empower state government to better solve problems, manage operations, and improve results. All of the work that we do is in alignment with that mission. And there's a number of varied things that we do. So one of those is consultation. So essentially, our office acts as an internal consultant to anybody that wants to work with us. So it could be line level staff, it could be a manager, it could be a leader, it could be a program, it could be a department. And on a regular basis, we get requests from people for all manner of things. Sometimes it's someone just asking about how to use a certain piece of technology better. Sometimes someone has a very particular problem that they're trying to solve. Sometimes people want to work on team collaboration and communication. And sometimes someone wants to do a legitimate continuous improvement process, and they're looking for some support on that. So quite a bit of the work that we do is in this consultation space. Previously, we used to be doing quite a lot of large-scale projects, and we've shifted away from that over time to doing a little more smaller scale and medium scale projects. So working directly with programs or working directly one-on-one with individuals in the organization.
Could you give us a couple of examples, maybe, of ways you've helped develop performance measures and help sustain improvements?
Yeah, so I'll get to that in a little bit, actually, because a couple of the other things are going to tie in with all of that.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah. So this is one of the ways in which we provide support within state government. The other is that we provide a very robust continuous improvement training program. So we've modified this over time. We did a major revamp of it about 2 years ago. And the newest iteration of it is that we provide essentially 35 courses to individuals who are interested in learning more about performance management, operational management, continuous improvement, problem solving, strategic planning, et cetera. We cover a whole bunch of stuff. So these courses are available to all staff. A number of them are recorded in a learning management system on demand for people to take. And then there's a number of them that are also delivered live by us through Microsoft Teams. These are all the courses that are available to staff within the program. And there's also this introduction to continuous improvement, which is assigned to any new staff that comes to the organization. So they get that, and I believe they have about 6 months in order to complete it in terms of a time frame. Numbers wise, just so you get a sense of how many people are going through the training program, last fiscal year was our largest year ever, and we had 620 unique individuals participate in the training program, not including that introductory training that gets assigned. So we're just looking at voluntary folks coming to our training program because they're interested in learning something. So we're hitting a lot of state employees with this. And that's been the majority of the work that Katie has been doing in her offices, shepherding this and managing this.
Great. Okay.
We also just recently launched the new technology training program. So we were seeing that there were some significant gaps across the organization in terms of where technology training exists. So when new people come into the org, we kind of just expect that they know how to use all of these different tools, Microsoft Office, Microsoft Excel, and otherwise. That's not necessarily always the case. And if folks want to find training on that, then it's often overwhelming. So you can do a search in something called Knowledge Wave, which is a contract that we have. You might search for Excel and come up with hundreds of trainings and then not know where to go from there. So we began this new training program. It's actually launching next week. We're going to be doing a bunch of live courses in Microsoft Excel, and then plans to phase in courses on SharePoint for staff, Power Automate, and also Power BI. This has been a big need, and we see this as a really great way to increase the productivity of staff. These technological tools are really advanced today, and they're extremely powerful. And so folks need to have the skills and knowledge about how to use them in order to leverage all of those really neat and very productive features. So that's going to be a big focus of ours in the next fiscal year coming up. And then on top of all that, we also manage what we call communities of practice. And we have 3 of them. These are essentially communities of practice that exist within Microsoft Teams, and they're available for anyone within state government to join. So our continuous improvement network has about 1,500 members, which is a pretty large percentage of the organization. It's a space for people to ask peers really anything related to kind of problem solving, continuous improvement, how people are doing certain aspects of their job, or any questions they might have about operations. We also do a monthly speaker series. We do workshops, book discussions, and other monthly learning opportunities in that. Then we have Tech Hub, which is the tech component of this. So it's a separate team, very similar. It's a space where people can ask any question about any of the technology that they have, and then they'll get a response. We also provide people with updates about new features and functions that have hit our government tenant. And similar to the Continuous Improvement Network, we provide kind of ad hoc training there. So I will run a monthly training series. We'll do demos. We'll also on occasion bring in folks from Microsoft to talk about certain features and functionality and how they work. And then the final one, government communities of practice. These are technically a piece of our continuous improvement network. But through our work, we were finding that folks would be coming to us with similar issues to other individuals. So we might have someone come to us asking about how can we improve our grants process? And then someone else would come to us and say, how do we improve our grants process? And then another person would come to us and say, how do we improve our grants process? And there was no space for all of these different individuals across the organization who are doing grants work to collaborate and talk about best practices and how one person's doing it versus another. So we created these spaces for that to happen. They've been extremely fruitful. We've got hundreds of staff that are participating in these. So we have channels and sessions that cover accessibility, which is really important with the new ADA rule coming out, community engagement, financial services, grants and contracts, data management and analysis, project and change management, and then workforce and organizational development. So specific channels for people to have conversations about those topics. And then we also have volunteers that run monthly meetings, which is an opportunity for people to get together and just share and talk and learn. And staff have, I would say, have really been loving these opportunities. The attendance at the monthly meetings is anywhere from 50 to 100 individuals each month. And people are getting a lot out of it.
Great. How many state employees are there? Just about?
Depends on who you're counting, but I think it's around 9,000, something like that, 8 or 9,000.
Right,
Yep.
and that's not education, not teachers in schools and all of that. It's just
Correct.
state employees.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I gave you the numbers on the Continuous Improvement Network. Again, that's about 1,500 members. Tech Hub is a little over 3,000 members that are participating in that. And I'll add, these communities have become a really great way also for Katie and I to learn about what issues exist within the organization, and also as a great vehicle to communicate. So let's say when there are changes to Bulletin 5 or Bulletin 3.5 for grants and contracts, a great way to communicate those out is by leveraging these communities of practice.
Great.
Katie, is there anything you want to add on that?
Only thing I think I'd underline is that these are just really great spaces for knowledge sharing. And that was something that a lot of agencies sometimes operate in silos. We have our blinders on, we focus on what's within our agencies. And it's been really great to see how people have felt connected to the larger organization as a whole. Like we've heard from some people who are participants from like boards and commissions who aren't necessarily connected to agencies who now feel like they have a place in the organization. So we don't only see like great knowledge sharing, but we also see this contributing to organizational culture, which we think is incredibly important because culture is what sets the foundation for us to be able to continuously improve and innovate. So the technical process and tech side software is really great and important, but the people side and the culture is equally as important as well. And these communities have gone a long way for creating a positive culture in government.
Absolutely.
Great, thanks.
That's kind of the broad brush of kind of the major things that we do. And the last one, and that's what we're here to talk about today, is state outcomes and performance reporting. So our office, through statute, is responsible for providing some reporting associated with 2 levels of accountability, and this comes from the results-based accountability framework. One of those being population accountability and the other being program accountability. So the way that we get at population accountability is through our annual outcomes report, and we won't go deep into this right now because we don't have time, but that is a report that was established as part of Act 186 of 2014. And it provides really an opportunity for us to collect data across state government associated with 10 different outcomes of well-being and present that data on an annual basis. What I really like about this report is that it is one centralized place where there is population level data that exists that crosses silos and crosses different sectors. So we've got education data that's in there, we've got environmental data that's in there, we've got healthcare data that's in there, et cetera, et cetera. If you wanted to find that data in other places, you would likely have to search multiple different websites to find that data. The memo I did this year mentioned that I'd love to make some changes to this report, and hopefully that'll come about through one of the recent introduced bills. I think it's H67, how to House GovOps. But I'd love to see this report expanded to include some additional indicators and actually be used more by the legislature. I think it was used more in the early days when this was launched in 2014, but over time, the use of this report has kind of waned. And so we'd like to bring that back in some fashion. So that's population accountability. So not talking about the performance of particular programs. And then we have our program accountability, which is the focus of our programmatic performance measure budget report. So I'll dive into that a little bit now. But first, in terms of context for that, so there's technically 2 places where this comes from. One is through Act 186 of 2014. And I'll zoom in a little bit here so you can see that better. There is mention in Section 4 there that the Chief Performance Office shall provide a report, and it's called a Performance Measure Pilot Program. And there's mention here of having to report on performance measure data collected by pilot participants, progress of all programs, and how many are using performance measures, and that we'd collaborate with the Joint Fiscal Office in developing new performance measures for programs. In meeting with the Joint Fiscal Office, they were surprised by this language here because I think part of this has been forgotten about over time. There was a pilot program that started back in 2014. I think there were about 14 programs that participated, and that has grown over time. And what I think has happened, because much of this has been prior to my time, is that there was a combination that happened here with those requirements and the requirements that are from the form of budget. So this is taxation and finance, form of budget. There is mention here that along with the budget, there should be, in addition to a statement of missions and goals related to the population level outcomes in the outcomes report, that there be a description of program performance measures used to demonstrate outputs and results. So this report really gets at the Act 186 requirement as well as this requirement, which relates to the budget. So a combination of two things there. The report has looked different almost every single year. It originally started as an export from the state's Vantage system, and then it became this really well color coordinated Excel spreadsheet. And then it became a different color coordinated Excel spreadsheet. And then it became this, and then it became this, and then finally, we are at a point where it has become this. So the past 2 years, it's been an interactive dashboard, but in meeting with the staff and the JFO, they gave us some feedback and they were like, this has got to be more user-friendly to folks. Previously, it was like, hey, you're just diving right into the data with not much context. So we made some adjustments to that. And so when you land on the homepage here, what you're shown is just some basic information about the report, how to navigate it. A note here about the judiciary whose data is not in here, but they have their reports on their website, which we link to. And then also, if you want to see Agency of Human Services data in any of their departments, they do that in Clear Impact Scorecard. So they have a separate system for that. So that's links to that. But then here, you can scroll down to any of these and pick a department that you are interested in. So I'll go with the Agency of Administration Central Office, and then you'll click this See Performance Data. And what that will do is bring up a table that will show all of the programs that have been reported in the Agency of Administration, as well as all of the measures that are being reported. There's a little bit of information on the top that'll say the numbers of programs displayed, and then also the number of measures displayed. So Chief Performance Office is ours. This is all of our data. We've got the reporting period, a polarity, which is useful because some trends you want to go up and some trends you want to go down. And some trends, there is no polarity. And we would say that that's potentially not an actual performance measure. It's more of a context measure to provide some information about volume in most cases. We've got the most recent value, targets where a target is set for a measure, the most recent year that it's been reported. And then based on that polarity, and if we have prior data, there will be a calculation that's done in this change since previous year. It'll show the trend with an arrow up, down, or neutral. It'll show the percentage difference from the prior year. And then there's also just a visual indicator, red and green, that will show whether that's good or bad. And as we scroll down, we can see all of the other programs that are being reported and all of the different performance measures. From this page, if you wanted to get a little more detail, let's say on the Chief Performance Office, you can click on that program, and then this will open up an option here to see the programmatic details. And when we click on that, what we'll get is a little bit about the program purpose and context, the services provided, all of the performance measures in charts, so you can see them all together, and targets would be in blue where those exist. And then you also have the option to visit the program website at the top right. The other thing I'll point out, if you want to dive into a particular measure where you might want to see some notes and see an expanded view, if you click on one of these measures themselves, this will open up an option here where it's see performance trend and notes. And when you click on that, that will bring up a more expanded view. And if there are notes, they will come up in the top. So number of engagements, projects supported, there are no notes associated with this one. Then the top left is how you get back through the different pages that you've navigated. So we used to do reporting by appropriation. We found that this is a better way because most folks are going to want to look at a particular program or department and all of their performance measures. But if you do want to look at appropriation level data, you can do that through this option up here, which is the advanced search. So that's right there. Here you can either view data by appropriation, view data by program, or navigate to the AHS or judiciary data. So if we view data by appropriation, if you know all of the appropriations, you may or may not, you can select them from the list here. So you'll see Secretary of Administration, Secretary's Office. This would be the Chief Performance Office, and the Office of Racial Equity is the two programs that are reporting in that office. The other thing that you will see is the budget for that appropriation. Now, not all programs are reporting, so this doesn't necessarily mean that the Chief Performance Office and the Office of Racial Equity cost $2.11 million, because they do not. But it is just a way to get a sense of like how much is in this appropriation and what are the types of programs that are being reported. And once we get the newest budget information from finance and management, we'll update these numbers and show, so that'll show the newest amount. You can also do a program search. So just up here, you can search for a particular program. I don't know if BGAP is in here. No, BGAP is in here. But you could search for, let's say, Act 250. I gotta click that off. And then must be a technical glitch right now, actually. There we go. And then that'll bring up the Act 250 program. This one in particular is from the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, because they have a component of Act 250. And then you can see all of the different measures that are reported there as well. The only two other things that I'll mention, overall stats. So we do a calculation of how many programs are being reported under an appropriation and how many measures are being reported. So this will be all appropriations aside from one-times, and also the Judiciary and Agency of Human Services not included. But from this view, you can see which appropriations do or do not have programs and measures being reported. You can scroll down and you get some of the totals here. So not including Judiciary and AHS, we have 220 programs that are being reported in the report, and a total of 677 different performance measures. So quite a sizable amount of data that exists within this report. And finally, the About page just provides some additional context on the report, email address if folks have questions about anything, feedback survey if folks are looking for certain functionality, we can attempt to add that. And then finally, a listing here of the different contacts from the agencies that have reported performance measure data. So our office, we're not responsible for the actual performance measures that people report. That's up to the programs. They own those performance measures. We do the collection and the consolidation and putting everything in the report, and we'll ask for certain aspects of data. But we're never really in a position to answer questions about why a certain performance trend is the way that it is. So that's why we provide these contacts here in the event that somebody has some questions about it.
And if we find this, I missed the beginning, I'm sorry, I've been finding it some on different agencies, but is this through your office or the Agency of Administration's main website?
Yeah, so this would be on the Chief Performance Office portion of the Agency of Administration website. Scroll down, there's a report section, and this would be there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and the link's also in the PDF that I shared for this presentation.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
What questions do you have
Well,
about it?
I'm going to go back to my question. This is very thorough and somebody has to spend a lot of time inputting all this data. Are people finding it useful? Is it helping people or agencies, departments make progress towards their stated goals?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we have been talking about quite a bit. One of the things that we really need to work on is creating a culture of performance management within the organization. So we know that there are some organizations that are using performance measure data like this to manage operations. And we know that others probably see this effort as a perfunctory, we need to report performance measures, so let's just do that.
Yeah.
So we have a bunch of support mechanisms in place to try to make this happen through our continuous improvement training program, through consultation, all of that. And one of our areas of focus in the next year is to try to build out potentially some model lines with some programs or organizations that are truly doing performance management and performance measurement. And to try to get this to be more of something that people are doing as part of operational management. It's hard to know to the extent to which all of this is being used. I would say we don't have a centralized system for this. So the way that this is done is it's a bunch of Excel spreadsheets that come to me, and then I put them in a Power BI dashboard. We do not have a centralized performance management system in the state where people are putting their data and viewing their data and then asking questions about their data. Everybody's doing it differently. Some are in Excel, some are in SharePoint, some using Power BI. So that poses a challenge, I would say, to doing performance management really, really well.
Right. And so I'd asked at the beginning about some examples of where you have assisted in developing performance measures or provided recommendations. I don't know if you have any examples of where you've done that. So we just get an idea of something concrete about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a lot of examples to share because that's new work that we're just starting to do.
Okay.
So we provided lots of resources. We have consulted in the past with groups around performance measures. And every year when we do this process, folks will come to us and say, how do these measures look? Can we provide some, consultation or advice on those? But we haven't done very targeted work on performance measurement with programs. That's a gap, and it's something that we are planning to do. To date, most of the efforts have been around like statewide, let's increase awareness, let's people know about all this stuff. But with the resources we haven't really been able to target and work with lots of different programs on performance measurement, but it's a thing that we're starting to do. Katie, did you want to add anything?
I was actually going to share. So most of the ways that we're providing support on this right now, like a program level or through our practicums. So all of the badges in our training program have an optional practicum where people can work one-on-one with us implementing what they learned in training. And we recently worked with a team, mostly Justin, specifically around their invoicing process. So we helped them actually come up with performance measures around their invoicing process and track those data. And I think before they were at about 40 days or so to process an invoice, and now they're down to less than 8. And they actually made no actual improvements to the process. All they simply changed was that they were tracking the data, and people in the program knew they were tracking the data, and that visibility and accountability just naturally drove improvements in the process. So there's an incredible amount of utility if we were to really embed this into how government works for driving improvement, even without changing the process. If we know that there are data out there and people are looking at them and people care about them, then that's naturally going to lead to improvement on its own.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions here, Rep. Harrison and then Rep. LaRouche.
Yeah, thank you for this overview. And obviously, it's important that we always kind of look at how we're doing for what we're spending in different areas of government. I'm curious though there's a lot of time and effort into this. Are we spending too much time? And are there ways to streamline this at all? And related to that, is there anything we can learn from what other states do for its own performance measurements? I mean, some of it's very subjective, I assume. I like to tell our voters I'm doing a good job. They may think differently. It's hard to know. I'm just curious for some feedback on your part.
Yeah, so in terms of the subjectivity, so we leave it up to programs to determine what performance measures they're going to report. We do provide some guidance on that, though. So over the past year, year and a half, we've been developing a performance management model that puts performance measurement in context. Because programs sometimes struggle to figure out, well, what is good? What does good performance look like, and how would we measure it? So within our model, we try to break down, well, there's ways to measure a program in terms of its inputs, its processes, and its outputs. And we can think about that based on the work that you're doing. And then it's also important that we measure the results that you're getting, which we think about as change in knowledge, skill, circumstance, behavior, attitude, et cetera. So you're doing a bunch of work, but that's usually intended to have some sort of appreciable change. And we want to measure that as well. So we've been doing a lot of training on this performance management model and trying to get it out there as like the way that programs should be thinking about performance and measurement and data. So the more we get that out there, I think the better off we will be. And it's not a new or novel concept. I mean, logic models have been used in the education space for many years, and a lot of federal partners. So it's not like we're reinventing the wheel necessarily on this, but it just hasn't been kind of at the forefront for a lot of folks. The other thing I'll say about other states, like we try to emulate what a lot of the other states are doing. The one that has a really good model around this is Washington. I think what we always look at in terms of Washington is the number of staff, the number of resources, the budget of the entire state of Washington. There's a scale there. They also have a performance management system where data is put in that they can report on. So there's a scale there that's a little bit different, but all the improvements that we make to this process and the training that we do is essentially trying to get us as close as possible to what Washington is doing. Because to us, they're like the gold standard in terms of performance management measurement. And I think the final piece, like, are we spending too much time on this? I think there's certainly opportunities to streamline. And that's part of why we're doing a lot of tech stuff is, if you're using the technology right, the collection of data should actually be pretty easy. It shouldn't be a manual process. For Katie and I in our office, we have a lot of measurement that we do, and most of it is automated. Because we know how to use the different tools. I would actually say we're probably not spending enough time on data management and monitoring and accountability around data. I would like to see it be more embedded in the way that people are doing their work.
Okay, no, thank you. I'm not suggesting it's not worth the time and effort. It's hard for us sometimes to relate to all the different, we've seen different summaries and various budget presentations, and it's sometimes hard for us to dig into that. So thank you.
Yeah.
So I look at it a little bit different, Emily. I mean, there should be a goal for each one of these elements, for each program that's being assessed. There should be a goal that's determined up front. What do you want to achieve, or what's the criteria for success and failure? And then, you get the data, you plug the data in, you figure out whether or not you're achieving success or failure. And if it's failure, then you should have direction in terms of, what needs to be done in order to correct it and and achieve success. So are you looking forward to try to working that kind of thinking into the model that you're working on?
Absolutely. So as part of our training program, we do a lot of work around establishing vision and mission and values. And then we take it a step further and ask folks to quantify those things. And then if they're working on like strategy development, deployment, to think about what is it that you actually want to achieve in the context of all that stuff. This was the first year that we asked for people to provide targets as part of the performance measure reporting. And it was pretty enlightening when we took a look at some of the data. It allowed us to see where folks really understand what performance measurement is and what a target should look like, and where folks don't really have a very good understanding of that, and there needs to be some more effort and work put in place. But absolutely, I mean, what's reported in this report ideally, from my perspective, should be the most important measures that the program cares about, and they are trying to make progress on. And it's going to be some time to get there, but that's where we want to go.
Because I would think that, just the idea, you got to have a goal. And understandably, it's going to be a different goal depending on the program. You'd have to have a criteria for success and failure, which will vary by each one, but the basic construct of it should be the same for every program, with the idea that if you're not achieving what you've already decided as your own self-stated criteria for success or failure, that you have to have some kind of corrective measure. You need to identify what is it that will, get you towards the goal.
Totally agree.
Yes.
Okay, we're actually have taken up more of your time than we had budgeted, but this could always take up more time. It's always interesting. We failed that target. But we learned more. So, Justin and Katie, we thank you very much. And if we have more questions, we'll get you back another time. We appreciate you jumping on so quickly after we requested to have you come see us.
Yeah.
So,
if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out. And if you'd like us to come back, happy to do that.
Okay, thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Doug, I think you're next. So cool. Thanks for your patience and thanks for coming in so quickly.
Happy to be here,
Now
man.
that we have the budget. So, committee, this is one of the couple things that I mentioned about talking about things that are in the FY26 budget that maybe we can pull into the budget adjustment and get going on, because they don't necessarily have financial implications in the way the rest of the budget does. But I will let Doug explain the rest of it.
For the record, Douglas Farnham, Chief Recovery Officer for the state. So I believe, Madam Chair, you wanted to talk about section E100.1.
Yes, that's
Yes.
what I'm told.
So, and actually, if we have time, I would also like to talk briefly about E100.2.
Okay,
It could fall into the same kind of bucket. So the first sub-bullet under E101 is not modified. The second, $15 million of general fund, which was being held for the cost of denied FEMA claims. And this $15 million was primarily a number generated due to COVID and the negotiations and back and forth with FEMA and risk assessments on all the programs that we ran with COVID. And we are having a good success rate with FEMA on our COVID programs. We're not out of the woods yet, but instead of asking for additional general fund to deal with some unanticipated costs related to flood recovery, we're proposing to expand the language of this $15 million. So instead of just holding it for FEMA denials, still have that be a potential use, but also allow us to use it for administrative costs, for flood recovery, for funding. We are running low on the ARPA funds for the limited service positions, and many of those programs need to run through FY26 and the first half of FY27. If they're closeout positions, they even need to run through the entirety of FY27.
I'm going to pause you for just a second, Doug. So if you're trying to find this, this is the language that we got on FY26 budget. So I know Aaron sent out the exact sections as well, but if you have this, it's on page, starts at the bottom of 22, but the meat of it is at the top of page 23 of the language. The language we got a couple days ago that has all the green things. You can't read the numbers.
In the email, it's the same thing.
Aaron, you just sent out the two sections, the relevant sections. Yeah, so we have this section is in the email, but the other one that he wants to talk about is not in the email.
Okay. But it is at the bottom of page 23. So if you have the paper,
Okay,
it's on the same page of the paper.
so this is this section 2, and we had budgeted 15 million for these denied claims. And am I understanding you that the denied claims aren't coming in at the level that you thought they were coming in?
Well, we're getting some denials, but they're also taking a very long time. FEMA is still working to close out many projects. And so the pace at which we're learning about this, is just going to be stretched out much longer. So instead of sitting on $15 million and asking for additional money, we wanted to deploy this money for some of this money, not all of it, not even most of it, for just patching up, making sure we can run the limited service positions. And then most of it would still be dedicated and held for that FEMA denial, that original purpose.
And then what happens if if the FEMA denials end up eventually coming in at more than you thought? I mean, that's sort of the risk, isn't it?
Right, that is the risk, yes. From our work with Guidehouse, we don't think that's a big risk. I can't say that it's not a risk at all. There were programs that we felt were perfectly safe, and FEMA actually denied them and made adjustments. And there were programs that we thought, well, we might as well put it in, see what they say, and FEMA accepted without question. So in some cases, one reason this number was so large is because there was, I think, roughly 500 million of FEMA spending for COVID. It's 300 to 500 million. It's a very large number. So even if we find an auditor that has problems with one or two of our programs, it could easily generate a pretty large bill from the federal government. And FEMA does charge interest starting 30 days after they notify you of a debt. So we wanted to be able to try to address those as soon as they came up.
Right. Okay. And so some of this is going to be used to maintain some positions for work that's still being done related to ARPA?
Yes. So with the ARPA waterfall from last year, the reversion construct, we had intended to fund $4 million.
Right.
So roughly 4 million of the 15 would likely be dedicated to limited service positions and purely administrative costs internally. Less than $1 million would be needed to help support some of the long-term recovery groups who are supporting individual households in rebuilding efforts and not buying materials for rebuilds, but helping them with case management. The desire to help them with case management is also selfish, Madam Chair, because if we help pay for some of the case management that they're doing, then we get to ask them for the data about how many cases they're supporting. So we get more visibility into how Vermonters are doing with their recovery. So supporting the long-term recovery groups in that way allows us to establish a connection and to know. Right now, we're tracking 140 cases of Vermonters actively still trying to recover from rebuild from flooding. And this would help maintain support for those households. We're identifying new households every day as well. It takes some people time to open up and ask for help after a disaster.
And so, so the other 10 million would be kept for the FEMA.
Yes, Madam Chair, that's
So
a breakout.
Spent any of the 15 at this point?
Yes, there have been some denials. I believe it's less than $1 million at this point, but it's maybe 300,000 to 400,000 of the 15 million.
Okay. Great. Yeah.
Mostly because the paperwork just hasn't got to the point where they've actually denied anything.
Comparison.
Maybe I'm missing something, but 4 million, maybe up to 5 million of administrative costs for a $15 million fund, of which we've only given out $1 million, seems a little high.
Yes, absolutely. The $4 million of what we were estimating the need for administrative costs was related to deploying the last $500 million of ARPA funding.
That's a better ratio.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the.
Yes, proportionally. And with flood recovery, most of the activity in flood recovery, over the last 2 years, about 30 million of individual assistance from FEMA, somewhere in the nature of 20 million of philanthropic donations for flood survivors. And then, of course, the state has set up some individual programs for energy efficient incentives specific for flood survivors and things like that.
Related to the administrative cost, I know when we had the ARPA funds, you had to use some outside consulting, was it Guidehouse?
Yes.
Make sure that you were following all the rules and regulations and using the money properly. Do you have to do that with FEMA as well?
Yes, actually. So what Vermont did, shortly after the pandemic started, we had actually been, luckily, fortunately, we had been working on an RFP for disaster support services. And so we published that RFP after COVID hit. We, expedited it to get it out the door. We selected Guidehouse competitively, and Guidehouse had a master contract with the state for disaster support services. The support for ARPA, state fiscal recovery, is a statement of work under that master. We have also had statements of work for them for the COVID disaster, and for the most recent flooding disasters as well. We pay for that contract out of the Category Z FEMA administrative funding. So it doesn't come out of any state funding. We just have to meet the federal rules for tracking that administrative dollars. We've also hired additional limited service positions for state workers in VEM, Vermont Emergency Management, but we can only hire and train so many internal staff, and the contracted staff allow us to provide a lot more support. The FEMA work in COVID was mostly for us, internal agency, Human Services, Department of Health. The FEMA work for the floods was primarily supporting the municipalities and making sure that we had someone at every meeting with a FEMA official and a town official trying to help them move things forward. I emphasize trying because we are not always successful despite all of our efforts to move things forward. Sometimes we are, some towns have already closed out and made it through very well. But it's with over 150 impacted towns last year, we had to pull on a large contracted team as well as hire new staff to try to give them some support.
All right, so thank you. So that was that item 2. Are we also talking about number 4 down below it?
Yes, number 4. So the $30 million general fund appropriation from last year was generated based on an estimate of primarily the damage to the Capitol complex and other state-owned structures. If you add up all the initial estimates, the match need for the state just to take care of the state's own repairs and mitigation, direct mitigation, was roughly $37 million.
Mm-hmm.
We are still negotiating that contract with FEMA. And when we start working on that, the need for this match to be deployed is unfortunately still several years out. So it's going to take a lot of time for that to move. In the interim, what we've run into, and partly from my position being created to work with multiple agencies, we have match requirements that came from the floods from the Environmental Protection Agency, from the federal highways. And so what this language is seeking to do is to say, this money can be used as 30 million of match for the non-federal share of disaster-related spending so that the federal highway match doesn't fall on AOT's budget and hit the T fund. Now, this will eventually we're going to need to ask for more match, and part of the approach there was in the ARPA reversion waterfall. We had intended for 7 million of the 36 to go towards match. It also depends on the final price tag that FEMA agrees to. Now, we will know for the Capitol complex. That's the biggest unknown out there right now.
And that's a lot of buildings.
So it will be spending down 30 million that we estimate is already insufficient to meet the full 5 to 10 year need. But at the end of the day, we do owe the federal highway match and the EPA match and these other things. And we thought it would be more transparent for any disaster-related non-federal share to come through this single appropriation so that it's easier for the legislature to keep track of, instead of it being scattered in different agency and department budgets. So that's the reason for the request for the broader language.
So we're repurposing the $30 million, and you're going to need the match anyway sometime down the road. And I'm just trying to sort this because this is the first time I've actually seen this sentence. So the non-federal share related to disaster spending. So we're talking about state fiscal years 24 and 25. So is that really the 2 flooding events that you're talking about?
Yes. Well,
And we didn't plan for We didn't have money elsewhere for any of this? You said it was sort of scattered around. Was there money scattered around in different places?
No, there was
Did
no-
this or not?
There was no additional money sequestered. What happens with federal highways is depending on the time frame of how quickly the repairs take place, the match treatment is different. It's an incentive federal highways will use to move
This is
forward.
all for road and highway, state highway money?
So
Federal, the non-federal share is related to,
the biggest element, Madam Chair, that would be brought in would be the federal highways potential match. That's definitely by far the biggest.
we're not talking houses here, we're talking roads and bridges
Right.
for this one.
Yes. Roads and bridges and state buildings. Non-federal share for FEMA, and another example of where we've used this appropriation so far is other needs assistance that we approve for individuals to receive extra assistance from FEMA. We have to pay a 25% cost share on behalf of that individual. So we've used this appropriation to pay for that as well, but that's a FEMA cost.
Yeah.
And that's only 300,000 or so. So it's much, much less than the big capital project.
So is that the only amount you spent out of the 30 million at this point? Balance in that account?
I think it's in the 28 point something million.
Jim, did you have?
Still very, very high.
Kind of a question. I mean, you're asking for this language to be in the BAA.
We submitted it in the budget. If the committee is,
The year 26.
Right.
yes, we submitted it in FY 26.
Urgency of putting the language in the BAA.
This one can wait.
Okay.
It can wait for the BAA. The $15 million one, number 2. There would be, we wanted to keep the BAA simple. That's why we didn't push it in. We could get by. So number 2 would be rather helpful to have in the BAA.
Okay.
The $30 million language, number 4, that could wait. There wouldn't be any hard negative outcomes of letting it go through the full discussion for the budget process.
Okay.
It would only be if the committee is very comfortable, then
Yes.
it would be beneficial.
And we may be, but we may not.
Right, you may
That's
not.
why I'm asking. Thank
Right.
you.
Yeah, so the 15, there's a more of a sense of urgency because this is all happening now.
Yes. And we might have enough money to make it to the end of the fiscal year. That one's a lot closer to the bone because as you said, it's happening right now.
Okay. Rep. Cosenza.
The negotiation that you're in with FEMA currently, that is for what, more of this perhaps, or?
So we have an extension until July 14th to agree with FEMA on a final budget for the capital complex project. Right now, we don't have anything close from them, anything close to that amount. We've drafted up estimates of what it would cost to repair and mitigate. They've refused those estimates and asked questions and pulled them apart. But we don't have a good working number to work with them right now. Of the 370 million of potential MAT, or 37 million, which represents $370 million of damage, 200 million or 20 million was related to the capital complex. That's why how that negotiation turns out is such a big driver of how much of this 30 million will be consumed. I think even if FEMA approves a low project cost for the capital complex, the 30 million will all be needed. But again, it won't be spent for multiple years. So it was very forward thinking of the legislature to put it aside. And I'm very grateful that that was done.
Mhm.
But I also didn't want to ask for more funds until we'd at least spent closer to half of this money.
Thank you.
That's one I would like to sit on maybe, since you don't need it right away, but then the other one is more likely of the two, if we're gonna do it. So we'll probably talk about that one another time. But does anybody have any questions on the $15 million one at this point? And there was one other section you wanted to talk about, right?
Yes, Madam Chair. E102 at the bottom of page 23. So this is related to the Emergency Rental Assistance Program.
Which is already in the BAA, right?
I don't believe this language made it into the BAA.
Okay.
This would be more helpful if it were able to be in the BAA. We didn't want it to hold up the BAA, but
Yeah.
if the comfort level was there, this would be helpful. The The original language was for us to be able to transfer up to $5 million of ERA two against various programs at the state so that we could expend the federal funds and make sure that any ineligible uses Treasury identifies, we find a different eligible use that we put the money against. So what happened with this is there was $4 million spent on affordable housing repairs that Treasury came back later and said, no, that's not an eligible use. And so this $5 million was written to help facilitate taking $4 million, applying it to a program that's eligible for ERA2, taking the money that was spent on that program and using it to pay for those repairs. Late 2024, Treasury issued guidance saying any fraudulent or otherwise inappropriate payments issued by a state are owed back to Treasury. And with a very strict guideline, and they actually sent Massachusetts a very large bill and a couple other states, very aggressive, very large bills. With the administration transition, I don't see them getting any friendlier. So I would anticipate them, pushing for any payments that we can't show with all of the eligibility records, they're going to want to recapture that amount. VSHA administered this program for us and scoped it out. And there's about up to another 4 million or so that Treasury might be able to make an argument are fraudulent or inappropriate. So this language, and we use the 14,300,000 here because that is the amount of funds left at this point in ERA2. So we're asking for the ability to take those current existing federal funds that we haven't spent yet, identify other federal uses that are eligible, spend them on those federal eligible uses, and then take the state funds to put against these uses that Treasury has either flagged as, no, that's definitely ineligible, or we believe they might pursue for recapture down the road.
My head is hurting.
And-
That's a good question.
I apologize. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
This is what's known as curing.
Yes.
Then, okay, so, do you want to explain, for those of us who haven't been at this table before, maybe just explain even more
About caring.
about curing, or maybe for an example.
With curing, so most of my life for the last 4 years, my professional life anyway, has been overseeing about $3 billion of federal funds and looking at how Vermont has spent that money, what the legislative intent on the state side was, and what the federal rules are. And there are situations where the desire of the state legislature isn't fully supportable by the federal rules. Or when we deploy a program, best guidance at the time, we do it in a certain way, and Treasury comes back later and says, no, you shouldn't have done it that way. And we're like, well, we spent $4 million. So, and there was no guidance saying we couldn't do it. And they're like, well, you couldn't. And we don't really have recourse in that situation because of the terms of the grant agreement. So what I do in AOA is I look through the federal rule, I identify some nice boring things that are eligible under the federal rules and are very low risk. So for ARPA, that was payroll. Now, the state legislature did not choose to spend $200 million of ARPA funds on payroll because that would have been a very inward-looking, not progressive way to spend one-time federal aid. But it's eligible under the federal rule. So I took the money from a program that was higher risk of federal recapture, applied it to state payroll, took the general funds from that payroll, and put it back into the originally legislative created program, which now has no more federal constraints or rules governing it, just the Vermont law. So at that point forward, that program can just behave as if it were any other program created by the legislature. And as well, Madam Chair, I think last time you mentioned, if the legislature decides to revert funds from that, it's now fully on the table. It's revertible. It's in play as with any other
It's kind of a swapping of ARPA money to one place and taking that general fund that the ARPA is replacing and moving it over.
And usually it's based on a risk analysis, sometimes done by Guidehouse, sometimes done by myself. Sometimes it's based on knowing who our subrecipients are, who our audience is, whether or not we think they'll be able to comply with all the federal regulations and the paperwork. Certain programs just aren't really achievable with all those federal paperworks and liens and property records and everything. So that was generally how we try to cure programs as we go. And it wasn't as much of an issue before COVID because there were very few federal programs that allowed any discretion at the state level. The feds created the program, you applied for the program, you either got the money or you didn't. And you had to spend it on exactly what you applied for. ARPA, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, these were all very different than that pre-existing federal dynamic. So this should not be a need for Vermont to continue doing for much longer.
Is this in this spreadsheet that we got, the December ARPA? Could I find it somewhere? This 5 or 14 or?
Oh, so no, you wouldn't be able to, Madam Chair, because this emergency rental assistance too is the remaining $14.3 million out of a $152 million grant that was separate from the feds for emergency rental assistance. So it was a JFO approval from, and so to look up the
Committee, we approved this sometime.
It's in 2021, I believe.
So you're basically curing the rest of the money that was in there?
We might have to cure the rest. I believe we'll have to cure 8 to 9 million. We'll have to move about 8 to 9 million of the remaining 14 million. But we didn't want to, and this is our last bite at the apple. The curative performance for this grant closes on September 30th of this year. So if we had asked for not enough money, then, or not enough authority, then we would not be able to come back and ask again. So that's why we asked for the remaining fund balance.
So I had thought the curing period was done as the end of December, but that's not what I'm hearing.
So the curing period was done at the end of December for American Rescue Plan Act state recovery funds.
Okay.
This E100.2 is related to American Rescue Plan Act emergency rental assistance funds.
Oh.
So it's a separate federal grant, a separate.
Okay, and it has a different date.
And it has a different date that's actually somewhat longer and somewhat shorter because we have to have spent all the money by the end of September. Unlike ARPA, which we can spend until.
You had to obligate, but then you had 2 more years to spend it. And this is, you have to spend it by September. So curing it will give you that comfort that you can, if you go over, you'll be okay.
And this fund had much more aggressive obligation and expenditure milestones in 2022 and 2023. We ended up actually, out of the 352 million that we received from the feds, we had to send back about $30 million because we couldn't stand our programs up and spend the money fast enough for the feds. So they recaptured some of it. And then they came back later and evaluated some of our uses and said, well, you didn't use this exactly right. And we said, well, you were making us build a program extremely fast. So sorry, what do we do? And they said, well, you can't spend the money on that. So.
So when I see the word new general fund appropriations, I don't need to have heart palpitations because what you're doing is the money swap.
Yes.
It's
absolutely.
not actually new money in the whole scheme of things. It's just switching.
Right. So when we performed the swaps this year, our financial operations just learned a little bit about how they would prefer the language be stated to be very clear.
Okay.
They weren't completely happy with that the legislative intent for the swaps with ARPA was completely clear. So this is attempt to just be a little bit clearer about that we are swapping money.
Okay.
And unlike every other federal fund in existence, ARPA, state fiscal and emergency rental assistance does not have prohibitions against supplementation. Standard federal programs, this would violate supplementation rules. And these programs explicitly were written to allow supplementation because that was part of the purpose of the federal stimulus in this one scenario was to help supplant state funds.
And when you say supplant, that allows the swap. It's not sneaky and under.
Yeah, normally this would be an extreme no-no for any federal funds. Yes.
It would not be.
Technical term, extreme no-no.
Really, really bad, but it's okay. It's legal. What we are doing is very legal.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's specifically authorized in the FAQs to pay for state programs as long as the purpose was the same, as long as it meets the
Okay.
policy intent of the federal program.
Do you have any question?
Yeah, and I apologize if this. Well, I won't apologize.
No.
I will just ask the question. Is there any money, is there any part of this $14.3 million that can be used for rental assistance?
So the way that this 14 million is broken out and is going to need to be moved around is that 4 million of the 14 was already spent on affordable housing repairs. Another 4 million or so was already spent on rental assistance in cases where, on reviewing the file, there's a chance that it might be fraud. There's a chance that it might have gone to someone who didn't deserve it, right? Because we couldn't identify the paperwork. The other 6 million or so is still in process. And our goal in performing these swaps is to fully expend the 152 million of federal funds. And if that means applying it to a state program in a way that leaves money on the bottom line for the legislature to consider in the BAA next year, then that's what we would be doing. But we have to perform a reconciliation of the fund this summer. And so there will be some money left over. The original intent was to take any money that was left over after reconciliation and put it into affordable housing investments with VHCB. That's what the Joint Fiscal Committee authorized as a process for any leftover funds. What we don't know at this point, because of these curveballs that the Treasury has thrown at us, is, okay, how much will be left on the bottom line? Last year, I had estimated it as about 7 million. At this point, it could be as low as 2 million. So it could help a program, but because the federal expenditures have to be completed by September 30th of this year, of 2025, there's no time or resources to stand up a new program and spend the federal money in a way that meets all of their documentation requirements between now and then.
Answer your question.
I believe so.
Okay. Any other questions about this? I think we have a bit to digest. We really appreciate you coming on such short notice and talking to us about it, and we'll see what we can do.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity, Madam Chair. And again, we put it in the budget because we can live without it until the end of the year. This one in the 15 million would be very helpful, but we also did not want to endanger the conversation with the BAA.
Right, and I appreciate that. And if it ended up in section C of the budget, could we do that too? It's in section E as it's currently written. I guess I can talk to somebody else about that. At least that might get you a couple more weeks. If we can't do it now, that might be another option. That's effective on passage. Okay,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
we'll take it under consideration. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I cannot have a short conversation about these things. It's pretty good. So thank you all for your patience, those who are coming next. And that is, please take a seat at the table. Paul and Megan,
Yes, ma'am.
I apologize for the delay and thank you for waiting. Have you been here before already?
We were here for BAA.
Earlier, yes, I thought so. So we will not go around and introduce ourselves again.
My name is Paul Daly. I'm the financial director at the Health Department.
And I'm Megan Hoke. I'm also a financial director at the Health Department. I work on the fall.
The committee asked us to come in today to talk about section E3112(1) of the language that the administration proposed for the fiscal year 26 budget.
Let me just find where that.
It's on page 32.
32. Thank you very much.
We're here at your invitation, so I don't have a presentation.
That's
The
right.
committee wanted to hear about it.
Hear what you have.
This will
to
be
say.
easier than what Mr. Corner.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, so this is not the HIV/AIDS section, it's the other one. Okay,
This section, whether it's in the 26 budget or in the fiscal year 25 BAA, as apparently the committee's considering, would extend the period for use of a one-time appropriation to provide an additional fee for the department's hub and spoke program, our specialized opioid treatment program. The program was expected, the original appropriation was in fiscal year, was intended to run for fiscal year 24 and 25, but because of startup delays, the funds will be available after the end of fiscal year 25. It would not, it's not necessary that this be put in the BAA. It's a committee's discretion on that.
so you really wanted to extend the deadline because it got started late.
Yes.
Is that the bottom?
Yes. And we have spending authority through the end of fiscal year 25, so.
Okay,
It's
so you're okay.
make it easier.
Okay. Okay. It's a lot easier to understand. Any questions for these guys? No? Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming here. Maybe you learned something more about ARPA while you were sitting here.
Make it this easy, we'll come back a lot.
Well, you helped us too by making it easy. I appreciate it.
Keeping you from a break.
Okay, committee, let's take a break for 15 minutes. And we have a couple of things to move on, and then we'll be back and have some more budget adjustment, not FY 26.